Everybody, it's Eugene Lee Show. Welcome to episode 7 of Forensics Talks. And today we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I think we've got it sorted out. So we're going to get started here. Just a couple of small announcements before we begin. So the first one is that the IABPA is going to be having a free webinar on Tuesday. This Tuesday, there's 2 sessions, one at 8 a.m. Eastern and one at 6 p.m. Eastern. This is a foundations or scientific foundations of bloodstain pattern analysis. If you go to their website, iabpa.org, you'll be able to see on the homepage actually some links and that sort of thing that you can sign up. There's also a conference for the IABPA coming on November 16th to 20th, and there's some registration information that will be coming forward on that. And also, don't forget that recently I announced that there's going to be a photogrammetry for forensics course. This is one that I ran previously, and I had a number of people asking to run this again, and so here it is. It's going to be available October 27th and 28th, and if you go to my website, ai2-3d.com, you'll be able to see that on the training link. Okay, well, we're going to get started here, and today I have Dr. Laura Fulginiti. And I've got a lot of reading to do here because she has an extensive background. She has her PhD from the University of Arizona since 1993. She's a board-certified forensic anthropologist at the Maricopa County Office of the Medical Examiner since 1991. She has adjunct faculty status with Arizona State University and a clinical associate professorship in pathology at the University of Arizona School of Medicine. She's also, maybe she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe she is the president-elect for the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, so that'll be really interesting to talk about that. And her research interests include enhancement techniques for the identification of unknown human remains, age at death, and sex determination using the pubic symphysis, and sternal ends of the fourth ribs, trauma analysis, including direction of force in pedestrians struck by motor vehicles, and understanding dismemberment patterns. And she has a paper that she published that I want to ask her about. She has participated in the response to multiple mass fatality events, including victim identification for the aircraft crashes of 9/11 and search and recovery and victim identification during Hurricane Katrina. She's qualified as an expert in both state and federal courts, and she provides teaching for law enforcement in Arizona, Nevada, Ohio, Colorado, and at FLETC in Georgia. She's well published, she's well known, and I'd like to say welcome to Dr. Fulginiti. How are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. That I think that was the longest introduction I ever had to do. That's the long list there. So
well, thank you.
All right.
You very much.
Yeah, let's get started. So the first thing I want to ask, and I ask everybody this as soon as they come on, is I'm interested in understanding or knowing when was the first time that really sort of you said, you know what, anthropology, this is my thing, or what first clicked for you to say you're going to get into this field?
Well, I started out being a Jane Goodall person, so I wanted to do primatology from the time I was little. My dad was a physician, and he had these books that had acetate overlays where you would have a skeleton, and then you could put the nerves on and the muscles on and the skin on, and I just was fascinated by those books from a very early age. And then we had the Life magazine, Early Man, and they had all of these cool diagrams in there, and one of them is the classic from chimp to human transition, and I just loved all of that. So Jane Goodall was a big hero of mine, and I wanted to do primatology. I studied it in college, and I found that it was not the kind of thing I wanted to do. I was doing skeletal anatomy with Dr. Mike Hoffman at Colorado College, and the light bulb went on. I just realized that forensic anthropology answered so many questions for me about having a career that actually meant something and was service-oriented.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be asking questions today, but you know, anthropology is not my background. So my background was in aerospace engineering, but I do teach at the University of Toronto, and the forensic science program there has a lot of forensic anthropology students.
Mhm.
So I have learned a ton about anthropology, just enough to be not even dangerous, but I understand the appeal and the fascination with forensic anthropology and anthropology in general. And I guess it's an interesting comment, but I think when you understand more about anthropology, I think it kind of actually in a way connects people. I
Yes,
don't know if that makes sense, but you
yes,
realize how well connected you are, if that makes sense to you.
yes, it does. One of the things that has changed in anthropology since I got started was that when you would do an anthropology degree, you had to do all four fields: archaeology, biological linguistics, and cultural anthropology. For those of us that are biological anthropologists, the cultural and the linguistics was a really hard slog. We didn't really understand how it pertained to us. But now that I work in a field where we are dealing with different rights, different cultures, different languages, I have found that it is tremendously helpful to understand culture and how they approach death. And I really feel that's a loss to the field, that people can now do a forensic anthropology or a biological anthropology degree and they don't have to take cultural or linguistics. And I think that's a loss.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, since we're talking about education and stuff, there's going to be students for sure who are going to be watching this. And one of the important things, or one of the purposes of these kinds of interviews is to make people who want to get into this kind of field just get a better appreciation for there's the academic side and kind of what you learn at school and maybe what you think forensic anthropology is going to be. And then there's, when you get to the actual field and the work and understanding just even the little things, like a lot of students don't understand the amount of paperwork you have to deal with. You know what I mean? So, and just that alone is something that people aren't prepared for sometimes. So what would you say to, an up and coming, forensic anthropologist or a student?
I have so many words of advice, but the first thing I would say is that the depictions of forensic anthropology on TV are not accurate. The the field, if you are actually a practitioner in forensic anthropology, you're dealing with death every single day. And not just ordinary death, you're dealing with pretty horrific circumstances most of the time. It's dirty work. It's not easy. It's very intellectually challenging. And everything that you do is informed by the legal system. So you might have a case that you think is very straightforward. You're just doing a biological profile. There's no trauma, nothing above and beyond. And then the next thing you know, you're in court defending your work. So I feel like a lot of students approach this with the idea that it's going to be very glamorous. They're dealing with death, which is everyone who deals with death has a superiority complex about it, like we're doing the most important work ever. And don't understand the day in and day out regimen and emotional force actually be a practitioner. The emotional toll is hard to describe. And the paperwork is horrible. I spend more time documenting what I've done than I do doing what I do. But
Yeah,
it's really important because you have to defend every single step, every single time, every single day.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You've been doing this a long time. So in your mind or some of the things that you've learned over the years, I'm interested to know what has changed in forensic anthropology since you started to today in both maybe just the discipline itself and how things are handled, or even in technology, like how technology has played a role in changing the discipline.
That's a great question. Anthropology uses a lot of the same methods that it always has, but we've moved far more into computer modeling and computer 3D graphics, 3D imaging, 3D modeling, algorithms for different kinds of assessments that we do. That is all sort of a brand new field for those of us that grew up in the pen and paper days. So it's been challenging to sort of get into more of a data oriented. You have to measure, you have to really quantify your gut feelings or your morphological assessments of remains. And for somebody like me who's very tactile, who's very sensory, the math and the data part of it it's a struggle every time to try to figure that out.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we've moved from a very academically oriented discipline. So we would have practitioners who mostly taught and then did casework on the side. And now we have people in medical examiner offices like me, not very many, less than 10 across the country, but that do forensic anthropology full time. And that, I think there's a little bit of a schism between those two groups. And I think that that's been a huge change in our discipline since the time that I started till now.
I see. Now, I mean, you're from the Phoenix area, so being in Arizona and so close to the border, is part of the reason maybe why you're there because of a lot of the, I don't want to say a lot of the issues that happen with immigrants coming over the border and being found and dying on their way over. I mean, that's a regular occurrence there, is it not?
It is, yes. It's Arizona is a good place for me because there's a lot of skeletal remains, and that has to do with the heat and the environment that we live in. The border situation has steadily increased in frequency since I started. It was always there, but the number of people trying to escape really horrific conditions has increased exponentially. And there's been a change from young men who were trafficking or trying to come up here for a job to entire families. And so you're seeing a lot more variation and variability in the kinds of people that are coming across the border. And, you know, it's tough living in a very conservative state. There isn't a lot of sympathy for the individuals that are making that journey. And that is another emotional tug that is difficult because you're seeing them, you know, after they've had a pretty terrible death. And then to have other people say, oh, we need to keep them out. We need to do this. We need to do that. It's hard. It's really
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, the emotional part of the work and some of the things you may have to deal with. Again, I don't know if, again, like if some of the students are prepared for some of that, especially when you're hands-on and that sort of thing. And of course, they do get, you know, some training or whatever, but of course, doing, you know, digging up plastic bones or you know, a rabbit or something like that at a field school is one thing, but, you know, doing the real thing on a small child or whatever can really have a big impact on you know, the state of a person that's doing this work regularly. So I'm sure you have good and bad days.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the things is that when you're dealing with bones all the time, it's harder to make that a person than it is when you see the person and then you work on their bones. So I do think that students who are not exposed to real casework are in for a huge shock.
Yeah.
Alone's going to knock them off their feet, but the reality that this is a person and that you're having real implications on people's lives. I always felt very attached to the victim, but the family, the ramifications of one death is, I mean, they're unbelievable. There's so many people that are affected by it.
Yeah.
And every day you've got 20 of those. So it, you know, it adds up. And I agree with you. I don't think students really appreciate that part of it as well as could. Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about some of the technical part of your work as well. In 2011, you co-authored a paper on the effects of corrosive substances on bone and that sort of thing. And I'm curious, did that come out of a case that you had, or what?
It did.
Can you talk about that one a little bit?
We had a mom and her 2 kids who disappeared. The husband said that they flew home to Ohio, but lo and behold, they were never found. They ended up being discovered when Walmart was being a kinder, gentler organization and was crating some Palo Verde trees out on a build site. And when the workers dug up the trees to replant them, they discovered 3 barrels. And in those barrels, there were partial human remains. The husband had used some form of corrosive material to try to dissolve the individuals. So on the mom, it was less effective, and most of her was still present. On the little girl, all we ended up with was her pelvis. On the little boy, we only had like 3 or 4 bone chips left at the end of the process. So we were all very curious as to what could have accomplished that degree of dissolution in bone and hair and teeth and skin in, how did you do that? And this was before Breaking Bad, and everybody knows about the bathtub scene, but this was before that. So we tried a variety of different substances. And what we discovered was that muriatic acid, which we use in our pools out here, and you can buy it in bulk at any big store, it dissolves everything in less than 24 hours. So hair, teeth, nails, bone, skin, muscle, gone.
Wow.
And we think we're fairly confident that that's what he used, because it's cheap, it's readily available. Nobody would think twice if you bought a pallet of it. And we think that that's what he did.
Are the teeth the most resistant to that sort of thing, or what else?
They are. Yeah.
Okay.
And the big heavy bones like the thigh bone, the pelvis, those are difficult, but it didn't matter. Muriatic acid was remarkably effective.
Interesting. So before you said magic words for me, sweet words, because you said 3D. So
Yes.
I'm all about 3D. So I don't know if that was on purpose or what, but
I might have had an inkling that you would be interested.
Okay.
In 3D,
Yes, I would. And I know how much of a factor it plays. And even at the University of Toronto, I always try to get students to use some form of a quantitative method to document or look at something. And so you've done work on the pubic symphysis, and I want to understand a little bit more about your work, because one of the things I did early on, and again, it's not my background, but I was helping somebody else, and it never came to fruition, but there's like a reference set of pubic symphyses. Is that what you call them? Okay. And
yes.
then based on those, you can make age estimations by comparing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I 3D scanned a set, and I thought, you know what, there could be something here where we do some type of 3D type of analysis. But tell me about what you were working on, and because there's like different methods and stuff, right?
Right. There are, yes. So one of the early projects that I worked on was with Dr. Hartnett, who was one of my early interns, and she did her dissertation on updating the Suchy-Brooks, what you're talking about with the sets of pubic symphyses, a phase, for every age range. So we did a pretty extensive study where we updated all of those, and that's the Hartnett Fulginiti method, which is now sort of coming into its own. And 3D printing has helped with that, because you can make it far more accessible to all practitioners. They can go on, you could put it in the cloud, you could have scans, whatever. It's much more accessible now. In the old days, we would get a box in the mail with the pieces in the box, and we don't have to do that anymore. So recently, another one of my interns, Dr. Seidel, is working on looking at the ventral surface of the pubic symphysis and doing a 3D image of that using a scanner and pixelation and a lot of stuff that I wish I could explain better. But it looks like that's going to be a very positive way for us to reevaluate the pubic symphysis. And it's interesting. I mean, it's all interesting. It's having students is wonderful, because they have all these great ideas and they're willing to do the work. So you just sort of guide them, and next thing you know, you're doing cool stuff. So
yeah, sure.
I would say that for 3D stuff, it's the babies, because we are now seeing 3D images of CAT scans, and it's remarkable the degree of specificity that you get out of those scans. It's cool.
Yeah, super. Just out of curiosity, so this was actually from a case I worked on.
Oh, look at you.
And this is a 3D print. So it was a woman who was stabbed.
Decapitated.
Yeah. Oh, she wasn't decapitated, but she was cut pretty bad, and to the point where there were tool marks. There was markings on her bone, and I think it was a bone that was fairly high up, maybe the third vertebra down or something like that. But we were able to to scan it and then print it out. And I thought, you know what? How cool is it that you can have a replica of the bone in your hand, and you can bring something like that to trial, and
Yes.
at least it won't freak people out that they're holding an actual bone,
Right.
but
Right.
I think it does have some utility, even at court or at trial.
It definitely does. I
Yeah.
would agree with you. And I think that now that it's more accurate and less gross, not gross in the gross, but it's more detailed, it really is a much more accurate representation of the bone. And one of my goals before I retire is to try to 3D print some of the trauma exemplars that I have so that we don't have to take, I mean, it used to be that our stuff would get into court easier because it was clean bone. And the pathologist would go in with a gory picture, and then we would go in with this nice clean bone, and the judge would say, yeah, I want that. And now with 3D printing, you can even amplify that more by saying, hey, let's do this. And then they can hold it in their hand and they don't have to be freaked out. It's great. And by the way, that was a cervical vertebra that you just held up, and you probably should know that if you're going to flash it around. So,
C3.
C3, just say it. Say
Okay.
it.
Okay. I don't want to show my ignorance here. Okay. Come on.
No, that's good. That was good.
All right. I have another question. Traumatic injury. So
Yeah,
you have an interest in this area.
I do.
Did this start because of a case as well?
So my caseload is about 85 to 90% trauma and not biological profile. And that was the other piece I wanted to address to the students. In a medical examiner setting, if you're working as an FA, you're going to see trauma, and not as much biological profile. So you really need to hone your skills while you have time before you're actually asked to put your reputation on the chopping block in court. Trauma is just something that I've always done. I learned how to do it in graduate school. And since I've worked for the county up here, it's been an exponential increase in the number, the types. And one of the interesting things about Phoenix is that we have a very high rate of unusual deaths. So I think we've had 19 dismemberments since I started working here. That's almost one every year and a half or so. I mean, that's pretty remarkable, I think. We don't get as many stabbings. We get a lot of gunshot wounds and tons of blunt force trauma. So I've had to become an expert in blunt force. And then the other area of research I'm interested in is injury to the neck structures, because I see probably 3 to 4 necks a month, maybe more. And I really need to understand the structures, how they operate, how they work together in order to provide assessments that are useful to the pathologist. So trauma's just in my blood. I find it very interesting. I think it was one of the things that really lured me into this field, was thinking that you could put a puzzle together and have that aha moment where you can actually see the events leading up to this individual's death. And there's nothing like that feeling of, I know how this happened. And the sad part is that you can't put a number on it. Like, you would love to be able to say, she's 98% accurate, that this is what it is. Whereas I just want to say, I know this is what happened, and I want you to believe me without having to put a number on it. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, the number becomes very important.
Yeah, sure. You had mentioned about court just previously, like testifying and that sort of thing. And there was a text that I saw that I don't know that you have here about
it's my book.
Forensic Anthropology. And I have to give you a plug for your book, but I have to ask you, what prompted you to write that, and what is it about, so we can let people know.
Okay, so this book has been years and years in the making, and I have to give Dr. Allison Galloway, one of my co-editors, props, because she's been after me to do a book since we started grad school together. This book came out because I'm married to a judge and because I testify a lot in court. And I was listening to other anthropologists with less experience and realizing that there is no handbook for how to go to court. And there's not a clear understanding of how our cases fit into the legal milieu. It's like we do them, and oftentimes you never hear another word about it. But in a place where my practice grew up, we are just integrated into the court system. So I testify routinely, and I thought it was really important to have sort of a roadmap of these are the kind of things you're going to see. This is kind of the way you should handle it, and give them a little bit of insight. And luckily, you know, my husband helped with all of the technical parts of it. And then the three of us were able to bring in people to write about their experiences and their understanding. And it developed into a really nice book about our interaction as a discipline with the court system. And then last year at the Academy meeting, we did a workshop on how to be an expert witness. And we put on various scenarios and tried to show people sort of the pitfalls. And it's just been very interesting to me, and very, one of the biggest changes in me is going from an advocate to an objective scientist. I'm always like, oh, we got to, you know, somebody killed this baby, we got to do something. And it's not up to us to be the arbiter of that. We are not. And it's hard to convince people in this field that they are not meant to have that role. You're not, there's no bad guy for us. There's no boogeyman. We just have to say, this is what we think happened. And it's our opinion. Someone else might have another opinion, and that's okay. You can't have your ego invested in it, because you'll get killed every time.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think you learn to do better with age, with experience on that sort of thing. Yeah, especially when you get.
Sometimes it's really hard because the cases are so awful. You just think, God, I want, you know, this poor girl just went through hell before she died, and somebody needs to pay for that. But it's not our job to handle that side of it. And because we work so strongly with cops, they are very advocate oriented. Prosecutors and defense attorneys are very advocate oriented, but you have to be the judge. You've got to be neutral no matter what. And that, I think, is something that is very difficult to learn, especially when you're an empathic person to begin with.
You're a member of the American Board of Forensic Anthropologists. Is that the go-to place for people who want to get into this area?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be our good housekeeping seal of approval.
But you're also, I want to ask you about the American Academy as well. So what's your situation there?
Okay, so right now I'm currently serving as the vice president, and next year I'll be the president-elect, and the year after that I'll be the president. That is barring a coup from the membership, which, you know, could happen. So wait and see.
Okay. Another question that I have is on your current research, and what kinds of things are you looking at today, like things that your areas that you want to pursue, or are there any areas in forensic anthropology that are very necessary? And the reason I ask is because I know that from my standpoint, and I've said this last week and the week before, when I first got into this area, I thought, they know it all. They've got it all done. It's all, you know what I mean? And that was my my naive me, you know, coming into this thing. Oh, it's all been done. They know everything, right? So, and then all of a sudden you start asking questions like, oh, we don't know that, and we don't know that, and there's more work. Yeah. So, what is it for you that needs to be pursued in terms of research?
So that's a two-pronged answer. One half of it is that we need more empirical research to validate the methods that we currently use, especially for trauma assessments. And that, you know, you can't go around whacking people on the head even though you want to. So we have to get large series of examples to prove that the way that we think bone fractures is actually the way bone fractures. Specifically, I'm interested in neck structures, the hyoid bone and the thyroid, cricoid, and arytenoid cartilages, and the role that they play in strangulation cases. I'm also interested in the pubic symphysis in terms of how we can maximize structures that we routinely take out at autopsy in order to better get age assessments and sex assessments that will help with identification. And lastly, I'm really interested in elder abuse. And one of my interns, Dr. Ballhoffner, and I just got a huge grant to study elder abuse. And luckily or unluckily, Phoenix has a large elder population, and there are numerous examples of abuse. So we have a pretty good population to study. And I think that those areas are super important. Another place that I would love for people to spend more time is on child abuse fractures and what is considered non-accidental versus accidental, because I think there's a lot of contentiousness in that field, and we see so many dead babies that we really need better tools to examine those cases.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Training. You offer courses, teaching and training. So can you talk about the, I think on your website you have the surface skeleton and the buried body recovery. Are those like seminars? Are they like, is it, they're very like short, long courses?
It's a 3-day class, and the goal is to introduce law enforcement personnel to what we consider to be a proper way to excavate a body. And you essentially have this tension between doing it correctly and doing it in a timely manner. They don't have 6 months to excavate the body. They got to get it out. So you take your methodology and you apply it to that, and then you give them a day to actually do it themselves. And it has been very, very successful. It's now a go-to class for most law enforcement in the state of Arizona, and that I'm very proud of that. It's been a long slog, but totally worth it. And it's just great. It's really fun. It's a great 3 days, and I think they get a lot out of it at the end of the day.
And you find, I mean, for them, I mean, you find that it helps so that when they encounter something, is it about, look, this is where you need to stop and you need to call the forensic anthropologist kind of thing?
Okay, so I start and end with that. And then
okay.
If you're going to be stubborn and not call me, then this is what you need to do. And then when they don't do it right, I call them up and I say, do you remember in class when we talked about blah, blah, blah? And then I hammer them a little bit, and that seems to message home. And then I use their example the next year in the class, and, you know, their compatriots go back and tell them, oh, Fulgi was dissing on you, and then they're embarrassed. And so the next time they call, and it works out. It's a nice feedback loop.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of the cases you work on, or I don't know if you can talk about any cases, but a lot of them may be open-ended. I mean, some of them don't have a closure. I mean, what would you say is the percentage of the cases you work on that have closure versus the ones that just are like, we don't know?
So in terms of identification, it's better than it used to be, but we still have 200 unidentified individuals in Maricopa County from the last 30 years, which isn't a huge number, but it eats at me. And I have a couple in my lab that I've had since I started, and I've tried every mechanism I can think of to try to get them identified, and they just are not, they're still here. In terms of traumatic injuries, sometimes the suspect is never located or the investigation stalls, and you never know what happened to that case. Those are frustrating for me, but not as frustrating as not getting someone identified. When I was young, 20, my brother died, and I was able to see him. And I've realized over the years that not knowing what happened to your loved one can really be damaging to people long term. And the times that we've had cold cases that we've been able to identify, the families are changed by that event in ways we can't understand. So I'm grateful for the fact that I've been able to help with that situation, and it eats at me when I can't. And I think, what am I overlooking? What hasn't been done? And luckily in Phoenix and in Tucson, we have really good teams working on this. So even our border crossers get identified. You know, that would be our largest proportion of unidentified people, but we do a good job. And so many that would have gone unknown get names, and it's super important. I don't think people really recognize how important it is.
Mm-hmm. You know, another thing that popped into my head in terms of like identification was, I remember somebody once saying like, you know, we don't need this. We got DNA now. DNA is going to do everything, right? So what would you say to somebody that says, oh, you know, we got DNA is just going to do everything?
Okay, so DNA is a wonder drug. Yeah. yada. It takes forever. So in a typical case in Arizona, for an unknown with no trauma, it can be 5 to 10 years before we get an answer back. It is tremendously expensive, on the order of $2,500 to $3,600 a sample. So it is not easily done. It's not easily paid for, and you have to have a reference sample in order to get an identification. So if the profile is put into the databases that we currently have, and there is not a corresponding profile on the other side, that profile is meaningless. It's not going to solve anything because there's nothing to compare it to. So I think that there are shortcomings with DNA that people don't really understand. And we're working on those shortcomings, but we still have a ways to go. So yeah, it's a great golden bullet, but it's not the golden bullet.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, well, and there's complexities within DNA as well, right? So
Right.
there can be problems that arise from that. But I'm thinking
contamination is one of the biggest ones. It can get contaminated easily, and I think that's frustrating too.
What were some of the largest like mass burials or mass murders or whatever, like large cases in terms of the number of bodies that you've encountered in your work?
I think that would have to be airline crashes. The largest number was 223, I think it was, in a Guam crash. KAL crashed into Guam. I did Alaska Air, that was 88. I did Colorado Springs was my first one, that was 25 or 6. One guy on the plane was already dead. He was being flown home to be buried, and he ended up in the field with everyone else. That was kind of sad. And then Hurricane Katrina was in the thousands, but as it turned out, we kind of worked that in shifts. And so I would say probably I did, I don't know, 200 or 300, but it was over time. So it didn't feel as overwhelming. And then 9/11, of course, I worked the Pennsylvania crash. So that was 44. And then I worked for a short time in New York. And yeah, those kind of events are overwhelming in the sheer numbers and the sheer randomness. A plane crash is so random, and then you've just got pieces of people everywhere. And you think they were just flying along through the blue sky, and the next thing you know, they're in 10 pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It's things like that really make you think about the world.
Yeah. And how do they, so are you part of like a federal team, or is it like a register where they, like, how does that work? They call people, like?
Yeah. So the dead people side of it is called DMORT, Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team. And they're regionally oriented, and they are made up of pathologists, anthropologists, dentists, crime scene investigators, data entry individuals, firefighters. We kind of have a little bit funeral directors. And the idea is that these people are ready to go on short notice and have expertise in a variety of areas so that we can effect a quick response that can be scaled up or scaled down depending on the size of the incident.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty interesting. Well, I have one more question for you.
Oh my gosh, are we out of time already? We are.
No, well, almost. Oh, we're getting close. We got if you got something on your mind, tell me. But I noticed you call yourself when you answer the phone, you call yourself Fulgi.
I do.
Fulgi. Okay, is that the abbreviated version of your name? Was that a nickname somebody gave you?
It is. And I want to say I appreciate you saying my name correctly. Very few people know how to say it.
Well, I heard it on I was doing some research on you, and somebody said Fulginiti.
Yes.
But there's an I there, so I thought it was Fulginiti.
A lot of people say it Fulginiti and spell it Fulginiti, but it pronounced it correctly. So thank you.
Okay, hey, no problem at all.
I started using Fulgi because it captured my personality better than Laura. And it was a way to integrate with cops who will have nicknames for everybody. So that was just a way to be one of them.
Yeah. Who were some of your mentors when you were, or even now, maybe, I don't know, but who were some of the people that you were like, oh my God, like this is, this is somebody I would love to work with, and
Guy. Yeah.
yeah.
So I started out in Colorado and I worked with Dr. Hoffman, Mike Hoffman. He was my original professor that introduced me to the discipline. And then I moved from him to Dr. Walter Berkeley in Tucson, who was one of the iconic early forensic anthropologists in the country. And from Walt, Allison Galloway was one of his advanced graduate students. And became sort of a touchstone for me because she and I are polar opposites personality-wise. And she was very good at cautioning me and training me and trying to get me to see the non-Italian way. She's British and I'm Italian, so that should tell you everything that you need to know about the two of them. After her, then Doug Ubelacher and Norm Sauer took me under their wings, and they're the ones that got me started in the academy on a leadership track. So I really learned a lot from them. And then those are the key people. There are so many others, and when you start naming names, you realize it's like the Oscar, the music starts playing. So
Yeah.
My touchstone people are Walt and Mike and Living Allison. As far as my casework, it's my students. I have really good students that keep me on track and are far more data, and that's not the right word, far more interested in making sure that they can defend what I'm telling them than I am. I am just a touchy-feely morphologist till I die, and they're being grown up in a time when metrics run everything, and so they keep me straight, and it's great. It's great. I'm overwhelmed with how many awesome people I have in my life.
Well, we hadn't met before, but I received your name and contact through somebody which held you in high regard, and so yeah, I just want you to know that there's a lot of people who I think look up to you, maybe as you may have looked up to some of your other mentors and that sort of thing. So
I will tell you, being at the academy meeting and watching students look at your badge out of the corner of their eye is very weird, because 2 seconds ago I was doing that to the senior people and you're just like, oh my God, I'm one of them now.
Yeah. You're gonna be you're gonna be the person with like the what they call the
longest tail.
That's right. You got the longest tail.
Power. I have an awesome loincloth of power.
That's right. Mine's is bigger than yours. Yeah. Okay. That's how it works. Well, look, thank you so much. What can I say? I really appreciate it. Do me a favor, hang back. I'm just going to say a few words, and then I just want to chat with you before you go. I just want to
say thank you very much for the opportunity to kind of shed some light on a very important world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and we appreciate your work and all the work that you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And hang back. I'm going to chat with you a bit more. Thanks.
All right.
All right, folks. Well, that does it for episode 7. And just a couple of things, just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that there is the IABPA conference. If you want to go to Dr. Fulgi's website, actually, it's just drfulgi.com. Make sure you go there, the IABPA, iabpa.org. And there is the free webinar on Tuesday, and there's the upcoming conference, the virtual conference that they're having. Also, there is the photogrammetry course that's coming up. And hey, if you're into forensic anthropology, clandestine graves, there's some really cool stuff you can do with photogrammetry there. And also, next week, I'm going to be interviewing Avril Ayewu Endero, and she is a forensic investigator from Nigeria. And I have some interesting questions for her. And if you're interested in how things may be handled in other parts of the world, make sure you hang back and visit us again next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.